How's everyone doing today? Pleasure to be with you. So, 6 months. 6 months from now, we'll be facing another holiday peak season, right? And that's when the operational throughput of our facilities, the operations, the automations, the capabilities that we've already deployed are going to be stressed to the max. We just came out of peak season. A lot of you already faced some delayed shipments, expedited freight, all these added expenses, maybe turnover and labor, and challenges in the facility, time to train, all these other challenges we faced, right? And the teams get together, engineering, operations, and say, hey, we can't do this again. We've got to solve this before this next peak season. So what do? Get on a flight, come out to ProMat, check out, see what technologies are available here today. And there's hundreds of technologies to choose from. So you start to look through, hey, maybe we're looking at picking. We need to 4x our picking speed. So you start to look at picking technologies that are out there. Maybe it's case pick, maybe it's each, maybe it's pallet movements, etc. I don't know. So you start to talk to the different vendors. You start to create a short list of capabilities and providers that you want to talk to. And you start to create a plan. Build some solutions. Create some ROI. Start to create some operational throughput diagrams. And you start to talk to IT. You're like, look, now I want to bring all this automation into my facility and I want to get it deployed in the next 6 months. Can we do that? The answer is going to be, yeah, we can get it deployed before the following peak, right? And a lot of times the challenge is because we're trying to solve big problems. We have end-to-end integrations and end-to-end solutions we're trying to provide. And we face a lot of these challenges today in the warehouse space, so we just talked a little bit about them. Labor rates, turnover, time to train of new technologies, as well as changing demands of customers and changing expectations. We've seen many changes over the last few years, and it's really tough to size systems and create something that scales with our business's needs, right? And we also have ever-demanding changes in the integrations and the solutions from a digitization standpoint. Before, a lot of things can be done manually, operationally. We can just get paper printed out and we can go execute in that facility. No more. We have more WMSs, WESs, WCSs. We automated solutions technologies, and it starts to become this hive mind of integration and data exchange that you have to carefully manage to maximize execution in your facility. So now you have all these additional challenges that you maybe didn't have before, but to get the benefit of these added throughputs, these ROIs, et cetera, you need to bring into these integrations. You need to bring these solutions forward. So the reasons for automation are typically very well understood. All the ones we talked about today. But the reasons that you don't do well with automation are typically the ones that are not talked about the most. And it's really a shame because we should be talking about it more. First and foremost, kind of two phases here, operations and technology. And these are the headwinds you're going to face when you start to deploy automation for the first and even consecutive times. There's a myth out there that, hey, I'll just deploy this new technology once and we won't have to touch it for years on end. And that used to be the case, no more. You're usually deploying a technology and about every 6 months or every 3 months, you're finding some new use case, changing customer demand, and now you need to iterate and optimize that solution. So what do we face? First and foremost, if you're taking on technology the first time, your first problem statement you're probably saying is, let's take the most expensive, complex thing we do in our warehouse, let's go automate that. Because it's causing us all the pain, right? And it's costing us all the money. And actually, I would caution you against this. What we find is that the human in the loop is actually critical to making key decisions in like value-added services, additional complex added services that we need in the supply chain, whether it's engraving services or other things that may need. Very tough to automate those. But simplicity wins, right? There's an old adage when you talk about AMRs and AGVs driving for pallet moves, driving's dollars, right? Every time I have a picker in an aisle that's not picking, I'm losing money. Because that person is now somebody that could be picking, but now he or she is walking a pallet to the dock, and that's not value added for that operation, right? So let's focus on simplicity, right? Complexity of automated operations. It's really hard to codify exception case handling and all these other things that we see that really be successful with these complex operations like value added services. So let's stick to simplicity. Next challenge, one's not talked about, there's a lack of digitization. What do I mean by that? Hey, I got a WMS. I'm already tracking orders and pick tasks. Great. But if you have a case pick operation, I bet you're not tracking how many times I have an empty pallet magazine at the end of the aisle that I need to get taken away to the dock, or I have stretch wrap gaylords that need to be emptied, and I'm just tracking that based on an eye line, right? hey, go out there, get it emptied, let's see how many times we need to do that in the facility. But I'm not tracking the actual throughput of that. And so I don't understand the labor impact of some of these secondary operations in the facility. So how can I start to understand those things? We'll talk about that here in a minute with IoT devices and how we can help solve that problem. And lastly, there's a fundamental lack of knowledge about total cost of ownership when it comes to integration, not only from the customer side, but the technology providers. Guarantee if somebody's done a bid on automation, they've gotten an ROI calculation on how that 3 to 6 month payback, 12-month payback, whatever it may be on that technology, 3-year, if it's more bigger technology, right? We start to look at the ROI and we see that, hey, there's a standard integration cost in there, but rarely is it taking into account the cost from the customer side, right? My IT team, my organization, my training, my support help desk, et cetera. And then also from the technology vendor side, there's a lot of unknowns. So there's always this long form iteration to the integration, change order process, et cetera. And every time I hear change order, I cringe a little bit, right? Because it means we're gonna pay 10x the cost. And it's not only gonna cost us for the money that we're gonna pay for that change order, but the timeline that we're gonna impact. And you're not putting that capital work that we're trying to do with this automation solution. So there's a fundamental lack of understanding really at an end-to-end focus there. So let's talk a bit about technology. Selection of technology is hard, right? There's tons of technology out there today. There's about 3 new picking robots that have been debuted here at ProMat in the last few days. Really cool stuff. So how do I pick the right one? How do I know what's right for my facility? A lot of times like, well, who's the best? Well, actually it comes from my data. Maybe it's more understanding my facility, how I operate, how I do things. What are the best fit technology for my needs? That's a tough solve. Next is, and along the same lines, does this fit my IT strategy? So it used to be that you had maybe a small IT closet to run phones, light internet connection to the facility, but now we have more servers on site, more internet, we have wireless access points, blanketing the facility. We have a lot more IT costs and a footprint and those facilities. So does this technology fit my IT strategy? Does our CIO, CTOs, do they buy into the strategy? Is it cloud-based? Is it on-prem? What is the wireless access points? What's the network? All these things, right? And these are additional costs that just continue to layer into the solution. So does it fit what we need for our total cost of ownership? And lastly, probably most important, is there's a lack of interface standards across the industry. Now, I'm not gonna actually come up here and say that I think we should go create a standard. I think there's actually benefit for everyone to have their own version and create their own value for their solution. One of the great parts of what you're seeing today at ProMat is the diversity of tech that's available you to deploy in your warehouse. You want that diversity, you want the different pieces, the different unique value added, and you want to use best of breed technology to solve that specific solution. But with that comes complexity of integration, because no two technologies see the world in the same way. And so now we need to have a way to solve that problem and get those technologies talking to each other so we can maximize benefit between them. And then because of that challenge with integration, we have a lack of skilled engineers. So we've done the math. We think the need for skilled engineers to deploy this automation is going to grow about 25% year over year over the next 3 to 4 years. There's no way that labor pool scales, right? We just don't have that many people that have hands-on capability, hands-on knowledge of what this takes. Yes, they understand APIs. Yes, they can build the integration, but they don't have the other side of it, the operational impact and knowledge to know how do we maximize success in that organization. And it's really hard to find those people. So you're gonna pay an arm and a leg for that to bring in-house. And if you bring it external from a consulting standpoint, it's gonna cost you. So now that I've talked about all the negative things about automation and talked about the scariest environment imaginable, let's talk about how we rethink this journey. And we start to take a look at how we maximize effectiveness with automation and start to see success in an iterative way. So what are the trends that are allowing us to rethink deployment and rethink automation? First is the expansion of SaaS offerings. More and more software solutions that you already have deployed, such as your WMSs, warehouse execution systems, transportation management systems, labor management systems, et cetera, as well as all the other professional systems like time carding, everything else, are now offering a SaaS-based offering. What this allows you to do is you have a lower barrier to entry. You can bring something in earlier in the process. Cost to justify is much lower. And so now we can bring in a lot more value and a lot more technology earlier in the life cycle of an automated facility. We can start to automate tasks. And when I talk about automation, I don't just mean robots and molecules in the real world. We also can mean software, right? When I take a facility from pure paper to WMS, that's automating. I have a system allocating, doing that business logic, that's automating. So we really need to think about how expansion of SaaS has really allowed us to bring more value up front in the life cycle of facility, and how it allows us to justify returns much earlier in the process. It also means that I can scale that automation with my facility's throughput. Now, along the same lines, we have robots as a service. So you probably talked to partners out today, and that's more and more prevalent we're seeing in the marketplace. So no longer am I coming with this large CapEx expense up front. I now can bring in just what I need at this time. Most traditional way is you look at 3 years out. We start to look at peak from 2026, 2027, and we start to plan to size that facility or that capability to that throughput. The challenge is that you're not actually getting the ROI on your system during that time in those peaks and valleys, when you're not serving those customers, right? And so when you're in the middle of the summer and maybe you see lower throughput that you would see in the peak season, with a traditional static automation solution, you're not getting that return on investment that scales with demand. So now Robots as a Service allows you to start to deploy scalable as you need them, right? And also with that, you have a shorter time to value. So the whole conversation with a lot of these projects is that we set this capital aside for 12 to 18 months, and it's not working for us while we try to get the robots deployed, the integration technology, bolt down some conveyor, get integration involved, IT's running, et cetera, and that capital is not working for us. So how do we actually bring that forward and say, hey, within 12 to 14 weeks, we can be picking 4x faster in our warehouse. We can be packing more efficiently. We can be shipping with rate shipping software, et cetera. And then lastly, and this is probably the one that we don't talk about enough in this space, is the cost per unit of IoT devices and the capability of that space. So as you probably talked to some of the partners out here today, or some of the technology providers today, or yesterday, or later this week, I would encourage you to go take a look at some of the IoT providers that are out there. Now, IoT usually would be like through a PLC in the past, or to a sensor from one of the providers that provides those scanners or sensors today, and that's driven through a PLC, and it's all LAN, local area network, it's plugged into your Ethernet cords, and you're driving a lot of cost into just getting some basic telemetry in your system. And usually you didn't bring that in unless I already had some other piece of automation that justifies that telemetry or that visibility on the system, like motor speeds or heat or things like that, so I can understand my preventative maintenance schedules, et cetera. But now I have the opportunity to bring in IoT devices at a much lower barrier to entry. I can bring in technologies that are like wireless sensors to check proximity of a device, how many times a door cycles throughout the day. And I can start to create transparency on things that are not tracked in my traditional systems in the warehouse for as little as $200 per device, right? And so what this allows us to do is to start to think about other use cases to create digital transparency in the environment. And so now we can start to learn from that data and take bets, more measured bets, more rapid bets to solve and improve the operational throughput of the facility. So what does this allow us to do in general? It allows us to take on a build, measure, learn mindset. And why does this matter? If you've been in manufacturing, you learn about lean practices, right? Six Sigma, lean manufacturing practices. How do we iterate our processes and take out waste and defects as fast as possible to maximize the benefit of the solutions? If you've been in software, you think about agile software development and all those things. It's the exact same principle applied to software development. What I would challenge you today is to think about how we can apply that same mindset to automation deployments in a facility. Do we really need to look at everything at the start and solve the entire end-to-end problem from the beginning? Or should we start to take a look at what data we may or may not have to take educated bets, take small bets, and win big, right? With higher frequency. So how do we put this into practice, right? So we talk about digitize, deploy smaller, deploy often, continuous optimization. Great, Nick, sounds awesome, but I have all these solutions, how can I do this, right? So let's walk through a practical use case. Let's say I have a case pick operation, or let's just do each picking operation in my warehouse today. The first thing I might want to do is understand what are my true order volumes in my facility. You say, great, I already know that, I can export it from my WMS. But what you probably don't know is all the different throughputs and the peaks and valleys in throughput throughout the day. So how do we create maybe some transparency on that data? Do we tie that into a business a BI system like Power BI or Tableau or something like that to create some basic transparency on the data? Very simple integration, proven. They're already out there today. A lot of the WMSs already have these involved. And how do we start to set up hypothesis tests like, hey, this is what we actually think our case pick volumes or each pick volumes is throughout the day. But also, how do we start to create transparency on some of these other moves, right? So if I have case pick, I want to know how many times my empty pallet magazines are being emptied. I want to know how many times I'm entering stretch wrap, because I want to know what my labor performance is on every move in the facility. Not only primary ones, but secondary and tertiary, right? So when you think about picking, if I speed up picking, now I'm going to have an overpressure on packing. And then when I speed up packing, now I'm going to have an overpressure on shipping. So how do we create telemetry and understanding of that before we start to optimize some of those other movements so we can predict the impact of those things going forward? So we start with digitize. We create some data transparency. We bring in some IoT devices. We bring in some other solutions like labor management, some of these things, and we do some small deployments. We try to keep it small, and we start to win big by getting information. I bet you also have facility managers that are managing multiple facilities throughout the day, right? No longer is a GM actually traditionally to one building. In the 3PL environment, you might have a GM to 2 or 3 buildings in a localized area, smaller brands or e-com facilities. So how can we give that person some transparency to understand the throughput of their system? So now we've digitized, we've taken some more data, we understand what's going on, we have a deeper understanding of every little bespoke impact into my operation. So if I'm picking faster, what happens when I see a dip in this? How does it respond here? So now we start to look at, okay, what's the most expensive movement we're doing in our warehouse? And maybe it's first, we just want to pick. We pick faster. We look at this, hey, our pick rates are not where we need to be. Receiving's relatively straightforward because we're doing full case receiving. We're doing replenishment to a pick face. That's pretty straightforward. That we've kept that pretty static. So how do we automate that? Well, there's some proven picking solutions out there today. So we go select that technology and we get that deployed with our WMS. Here's where actually the first roadblock comes into play. Your typical way of doing this and your default answer is going to be, let's take everything we do operationally today and automate it. We talked about automating complexity. That's where you start to lose. How do we start to look at everything that we can do to bring operations to the automation, not automation to the operations? And I know that's counterintuitive, but some of the things that we think about today, we just do. They're just part of our operational throughput today. And we automate, it's like, well, hey, the automation is just going to solve all these little steps. So how do we think about all these little things like vehicle inspection and all these little traditional steps that we do? How can we handle that outside of the automated process? Stick to the best practices from those vendors and maximizes our time to value, right? Because every time I bring on customization, I'm extending the timeline of when I can actually bring on that technology. And also I could be destroying inadvertently the ROI of the original model. So let's stick to standard, right? Let's get a best practice picking solution in place and let's get that going. So now we're picking 400x faster, right? Great, everybody's happy, we're high-fiving in the aisles. And then we had our first peak day, maybe it's a Thursday, I don't know. We hit our Thursday facility rate, and all of a sudden pack out is getting slammed. We can't get enough people over there. There's boxes piling up from the totes. We got all these totes from the vendors that are coming from those robots. They're lining up, and now we have a problem at pack out. We couldn't see. But hey, guess what? We digitized. We understood that. We knew that was coming. So maybe our next small bet is let's find a way to automate the scanning process, right? So traditionally I have a hand scanner today. Maybe I want to do something that's a pass-through. There's some great technologies out there, some in our booth. I will tell you that ahead of time. Maybe I could just do a pass-through. I can 5x my scan rate to get my auto bagging. Maybe I bring in an auto bagger. I would also say maybe you don't need to integrate that technology. There's this default answer of, hey, let's integrate everything in the data flow so we have full transparency. Not everything we do need to automate. Maybe like auto bagging solution, we can just roll up to that environment and get running. And so now we're packing out faster. So the next question is, well, hey, we're doing great. We're picking, we're packing faster, we're shipping, we probably already have rate shipping software. Maybe what we need to do is start to look at our packaging efficiency. So we bring in a packaging efficiency expert, started bringing some of these automation solutions that allow us to build bespoke box sizes for whatever we're packing at the time. So now what we do is we take that data that we've already taken, we give them a better data package up front, and we get an understanding of what are the traditional box sizes we need or what are the technologies that will best fit our solution. So I don't overbuy, I don't underbuy, I build the right solution for the right answer, right? And so now I bring in a pack out process that's more efficient and for what I need. And then lastly, because we digitized first, now we have telemetry on everything we're doing, right? So now I can monitor the peaks and valleys and I can understand where we're winning, where we're losing. And if every one of these steps, like, yeah, that was happy path, right? Everything was great, Nick. Everything was perfect. We did everything exactly the way we were. We high-fived through the whole process. We automated this whole thing in 6 months, but sometimes it's not going to win. Sometimes you're going to learn something you didn't have transparency on. And so how can we minimize risk at each one of these steps so that we can pivot, we can take changes, we can move in our operation and still take the value up front that we saw, right? So if we're already optimizing our digitization, we're already optimizing picking, but maybe we don't find the right pack-out solution. We can iterate on that while we're still taking value up front. And if we did it the traditional way, we would have waited 12 to 18 months to take that value. And guess what? Now we're learning all of those problems all at the same time. Facility's down, we're not shipping to customers, we're having issues, and we go through this painful 30 to 60 days, and we don't ever get our ROI. And my bet is that facility never hits the original model that it was designed at, right? So how do we start to think about this iteration process and continually optimizing the solution? So, obviously at SVT we have a very opinionated stance on this, and we like to solve this problem with integration. We believe that all this data that flows from disparate systems are really similar in many ways. Doesn't matter what the technology is. A transport from one location to another and a put away, same thing when it comes to data, right? When you think I'm moving a pallet from one location to another, just might be a place of rest as opposed to a P&D, right? So how can we normalize these data flows and now enable rapid integration at scale? And so this is what we do at SVT, and we believe in this integration approach. And this is where we're seeing the best companies in the world win with automation today, because they're following this process. They're digitizing first, they're deploying more often and smaller, they're taking smaller, more measured bets with data, they're winning big with that approach, and then because they have that telemetry in place, they're continuously optimizing and integrating at scale. So they're bringing in other solutions as their demands change, and they can pivot those technologies as needed. So, thanks for joining me during the lunchtime today. I really appreciate the session. Really excited about everybody being here today, but our booth here is just off the main drag, N7148. Come see us if you wanted to learn more about how we can help you with this integration at scale. Come find us in the Softbot to the Future t-shirts. We got some business cards over here. And also, we just released a product this week called App Directory. So a lot of times you hear integration platforms, hey, we can move fast, we can do these things. So we are showcasing one of the things we call App Directory at the booth. We're talking about how we have ready-built integrations and ready-built solutions already today that are clickable value for you with maybe technologies you already have, like your WMS, or maybe your rate shipping software that you already have today, and how we can help you accelerate that value. So thanks for your time today, and I'm open to any questions if anybody has
do we have any questions out there? Anyone? Nick, you're so good, you covered it all. So let's give a round of applause to Nick Lard, SVT Robotics, Senior Vice President.
Thank you so much,
Thanks
y'all.
again, Nick. Thank you guys for coming. Have a great day.